Hello and welcome to In the Classroom episode number 31. Today is November 8th, 2018. And today I want to address the question, how do you avoid working in isolation as an instructional leader? In the Classroom with Benjamin Stewart, making teaching and learning more transparent, is a podcast for educators, instructional designers, administrators, trainers, or anyone who is interested in topics related to curriculum, assessment, instruction, and educational technologies. The goal is to provoke new ideas, perspectives, and context around teaching, learning, and educational leadership. Before we get into my workflow, I want to address this issue or problem of working in isolation. I think as teachers we can find many cases where we tend to get in a routine where we prepare for class, we give the class, we grade papers, then we cycle again and prepare for the next class and so on. And depending on our situation, depending on the institution where we work, we may or may not have a lot of opportunities to interact with colleagues. Hopefully that is a possibility where you are, where you work. But regardless, I want to think really in terms of this personal learning network and how one can really get the most out of one's professional learning by really understanding and taking advantage of a personal learning network with the sole purpose of really avoiding this cases of isolation. I know I've been on a lot of calls or online conferences or chats where I've talked with other educators, and it seems almost natural in our case getting online and sharing ideas, but invariably many teachers will be talking about cases where this is not really the norm for where they work. These educators are free to share ideas and get online and connect with colleagues from around the world, but many of us share this case where we don't have the same opportunities or maybe even the same mindset locally within our own institution really to share our ideas as openly as we would perhaps with other educators from around the world. So thinking in terms of this problem of looking at how we can make our own teaching and learning more transparent, which I think at the end of the day really relates to teacher burnout. I mean, I think that in many cases where we tend to get discouraged in our profession, I think it results, at least in part, by really not having these connections that we, I think, value in when we interact with others. So before I get into my own workflow, and today I want to share what my workflow is in hopes of really encouraging and learning more from others as to how they design their workflow for their own professional learning. Not that the way that I share my workflow or the way that I integrate my workflow into my routine is the best way, but it's more as really encouragement, like I said, to hopefully encourage others to share their workflow. But before we get into that, I'd like to talk first about the idea of a personal learning network. And for me, when I think of a personal learning network, I think of it in terms of connections in three different, kind of a collective, three different ways, three different areas. The first being social or human connections that we make. The second being material or technological. And the third having to do with ideas. So the idea is to really understand how we interact with others, what kind of tools or technologies we use, and what kind of ideas do we share. And looking at these three in aggregate to understand what works, how do we share ideas, share our teaching practice, and how do we actually receive information from others. The first thing I want to mention about my own workflow is I want to talk about certain technologies and how I tend to use them. And my probably default technology is Twitter as far as how I go about sharing information and really receiving a lot of information, as I will frequently get on my Twitter feed and see who's posting and find a lot of ideas. I stick to Twitter. I follow individuals that I feel that I can learn from, that really I've got this idea of professional learning in mind when I connect with Twitter. So I tend to not connect with friends or family in Twitter. I leave that up to Facebook, and really tend to look for professionals and, again, educators, or just those who have a lot to share with regard to different topics that I'm interested in. Those will be the ones that I tend to gravitate towards.
You're listening to In the Classroom with Benjamin Stewart, where each episode poses a through-line question or problem intended to generate dialogue around current issues that affect educational stakeholders who are concerned with improving learning outcomes. If you have anything to say about today's topic, send your comments and questions to www.benjaminlstewart.org.
So with Twitter, I have gotten into a routine. I use Feedly as a way to bring in or basically organize information that I'm interested in regarding education. And then I'll send it out through Buffer, so that Buffer then pushes it out to Twitter. It will post Twitter feeds or Twitter posts on the hour, every hour on the hour. So I will, for the most part, will have every hour I will send out a tweet based on some article that I came across, some website, a book, whatever the case may be. And I've found that building that into my own routine, which doesn't really take that much time, probably at the most 10 minutes out of my day, at the most, probably between 5 to 10 minutes a day, I will spend finding information on Feedly and pushing it out to Buffer, which will then post to Twitter. But I found that in doing that, I will come across certain things that I want to really talk about, whether I want to write a blog post, or maybe I decide to create a podcast, an audio, or maybe even a video, depending if there's a visual element that I think is required also. I find that by getting into this routine of going through these posts in Feedly, I will come across certain posts that I really want to think more about and discuss. So when I do come across those, I tend to use either Pocket, or I'll use Feedly, and I'll create a bookmark and save that so that I can go back later and again think about it and prepare some sort of post or podcast. So Feedly, Buffer, Pocket, Twitter, those are my primary go-to technologies that I use to afford some sort of dialogue or communication with others, again, primarily through Twitter. And I will also often have back and forth exchanges with colleagues via Twitter on certain topics that will also generate either a blog post or a podcast. And I find that just getting into this routine of communicating and reading articles every day, a little bit every day, I'm more likely to come across new topics that I want to share with others. So once I find a topic that I really want to think more about and write about or discuss, I will then, depending on if I want to post to my website, or if I want to create an audio. Let's say if I want to create an audio podcast, I'll use Ferrite. If I want to create something for YouTube, a video, I will use Lumafusion. And both of these apps, Ferrite and Lumafusion, are for the iPad. And I've got a second generation iPad Pro that I've been using, and basically I will generate everything and create everything that I need using a mobile device, primarily my iPad Pro or my Android phone. And since I use Google Docs for show notes and use it for organizing my ideas, I invariably will be able to think about and prepare certain broadcasts wherever I am. So even if I'm not in my office, if I'm on the road, if I'm at a basketball game or waiting for one of my boys to play basketball, I will be able to, in any moment, if I'm thinking about something, I can get it down into Google Docs or continue to prepare for something that I want to publish later on. So I think this idea of using mobile devices in the preparation and the communication of maintaining and understanding and really cultivating my personal learning network, I think, is what makes it work. If I was limited to just doing all of this on the desktop computer, I don't think certainly wouldn't be the same, and probably wouldn't even be doable, just because just the way that I use mobile technologies. So workflow, I tend to use Ferrite, Lumafusion, Google Docs, and my iPad Pro and Android smartphone. Those are the basic technologies that I use. The apps, Feedly, Buffer, and Pocket, and Twitter, of course. I will use occasionally Facebook. I'll dip into a few Facebook groups, but honestly, because I don't really spend much time in Facebook anyway, I find that I seldom will enter into Facebook groups with any regularity. So the question I want to pose to you is, as an educational leader, as a teacher, trainer, how do you avoid isolation? How do you reach out to or within your personal learning network in a way that offers you a continual amount of professional learning experiences or opportunities? And, I'm all for going to conferences, and I think there's a lot of value in networking face-to-face, in person, via these conferences. But I think we also can complement those experiences by just trying to build into our own routine a way that we can make our teaching and learning more transparent. And this is what I'm curious about, how others do this, how others build into their own routine this idea of sharing with their colleagues.
Thanks for listening to In the Classroom with Benjamin Stewart. If you want to be part of the broadcast or just would like to leave feedback about the show, leave me a message at www.benjaminlstewart.org. In the Classroom, encouraging educators to think and do out loud.